The threat of unchecked intelligence activity should pique the interests of every individual residing in our nation today. Our rights and liberties are being threatened to a great extent already by intelligence activities, even with legislative oversight already in place. Take, for example, the USA Patriot Act. Our right to protection from unreasonable search and seizures, as outlined in Amendment 4, is directly threatened by this act. Essentially, it allows for any and all communication by individuals within the country to be evaluated by intelligence agents without probable cause in order to protect the country from terrorism. This may sound good on the surface because terrorism is obviously awful, but imagine if there was no legislative oversight for intelligence activities like these. One can only wonder how egregiously our rights would be violated in such a case. Let's begin by discussing the origins of our nation. Our country was founded by a group of individuals who believed that unchecked governing bodies were so horrendously and inherently tyrannical that all levels of our government should be checked by another. This sentiment of preventing tyrannical abuses was woven throughout the Constitution and can be cited in many instances, including within the legislative branch itself. For example, Article 1, Section 2 mentions that the House of Representatives shall have the sole power of impeachment. In direct response to this assignment of power, Article 1, Section 3 states that the Senate shall have the sole power to try all impeachments. Another instance that emphasizes this sentiment for protection from abuses of power can be seen in Article 2, Section 2. In this section, checks and balances are emphasized as it is designated that the powers of the President must be checked by the Senate when attempting to sign treaties with foreign nations. This brings me to the purpose of the legislative branch, which is to appropriately represent the political interests of constituents in the lawmaking and governing process. In America, these interests are represented by two separate groups within the legislative branch. One is through apportioned representation based upon population size, the House, and one through equal apportionment based upon state, the Senate. This division of the legislative branch ensures that minority groups of people are not underrepresented in the lawmaking process. So why is legislative oversight and checks on power important? Perhaps the best way to answer this question is briefly describing some of the influences our founders had for creating a legislative branch that is separate from the executive. Essentially, the Founding Fathers were witnessing gross abuses of power by King George III on the American colonies. As king of a very powerful government who had no separation of powers, King George III and his oligarchy were able to do whatever they wanted with little retribution from anybody in Britain and nobody from the colonies. This led to many grievances committed by the unchecked king, including the taxing of colonial citizens without providing direct political representation for their interests in the British government. This, along with several other tyrannical crusades committed by the Crown, is what led to the American Revolution and eventually the establishment of our Constitution. Without separate legislative oversight, individuals or groups holding power within a governing body, such as King George III, are able to easily abuse their powers and commit grievances on the people they govern. As implicated by the founders, unchecked governing bodies are easily tempted to behave tyrannically and abusively. With so much emphasis placed on preventing governmental abuse, one must wonder what good this can lead to. Good congressional oversight can lead to a balanced and representative government that promotes the special and particular interests of its vast and diverse population. Perhaps it can lead to the impeachment and removal of a tyrannical president who is threatening the nation's prosperity and beliefs. Or, in the case of U.S. intelligence activities, it can prevent egregious infringements upon rights as Americans. As mentioned earlier, even with legislative oversight, we can see abuses of power by U.S. intelligence activities that grossly violate our personal rights and liberties. It leads one to wonder how bad things could get without any congressional oversight. With access limited to personal information and the ability to enforce laws, U.S. intelligence activities without legislative oversight could lead to a situation that resembles the USSR and the Soviet bloc. With conversations being spied on and every actively monitored by the government, camaraderie between citizens dissipates. When individuals become aware that they could face legal consequences for even the slightest slip of the tongue, they begin to lose trust in all people. To conclude, I would like to reiterate some of my main points. Our country was founded upon the need for adequate representation of all citizens' interests, with particular focus on personal rights and liberties that must be protected from tyrannical regimes. If we were to leave any branch of the government to operate without some sort of oversight by another, we would likely see to some degree an abuse of power. When you apply this to the contemporary U.S. intelligence activities, we can see that our rights are already being violated, namely the Fourth Amendment. When one considers the consequences of unchecked U.S. intelligence activities, a fear of totalitarianism begins to brew. Lest we recreate the USSR or follow in the footsteps of the Chinese, the necessity of oversight for U.S. intelligence activities must be emphasized.